Okay, so this is how I edited the 1 Million Trees documentary. This is by far my biggest and most ambitious edit that I've ever done. So this video is really just about showing everyone this project file just because it looks so crazy to me. I wanted to share what a year-long documentary looks like. So this is my picture lock cut. As you can see, I have 25 tracks of audio. That's because all the music I have in the stems here, and this is all my audio, and then I've got it all pretty much down to just one layer of video. So the way that I edited this one is complicated because it's an ongoing project with Adobe. If you have a folder with your footage in it, you can't keep going back to that folder and making changes. You can't keep dumping new footage into that folder after you've already dumped footage out of it. It just makes things really confusing and more difficult. So the way that I organized this was by day. So in my folder, every new day gets its own folder, and then I would dump that day separately, and then each day gets its own timeline to begin with. So I started off by just cutting down these days. So you can see here, day 1, I did about 4 cuts of each day. Give you a taste of what that looks like. Day 4, for instance, on cut 1 it looked like this. We had one interview, or maybe, yeah, we just had the one interview. We had another piece with audio here, and then a lot of footage from being on the block, on-site footage. So each day goes through a process like this. This is what day 4 cut 1 looks like. This is what day 4 cut 4 looks like. So by cut 4, I separated the B-roll and the dialogue. And to take things back a minute, I think when you're working on a big project like this, it's really hard to get perspective of what are the best pieces. It's really hard, especially like with a documentary like 1 Million Trees, we set out with like a really broad scope of what the story was about. This was meant to be the tree planter's journey, and I pitched it to everyone as like an all-encompassing tree planting documentary. So the story that we were trying to tell was the entire journey that someone goes through, from mentally, physically, spiritually, from day 1 learning how to plant your first tree, you know, to the hurdles that you face, the friends that you meet, the lessons that you learn, what you have to overcome, the way that it changes you, the way that it changes your perspective. Just trying to show that as an arc through the people that we interviewed and participated in the project. So it's meant to start from your very first season and then go to the point of giving you the perspective of someone who has planted 1 million trees, and then far beyond that as well. So to get a handle on that, the first thing we did was early on, we made a rough assembly. So on my first cut of the rough assembly, I'm trying to put this stuff in order, and it's a bit of a crapshoot, honestly, to begin with. This was before the New Year, so this is probably around December 2019. I started editing our first assembly cut, and this is the first time that things aren't cut individually and it's all on one timeline. So that's cut 1, you know, we're looking at like 4 hours long of a cut. And so I just go through it and trimming it down to the best pieces, reorganizing things, finding what works well together, what doesn't. And so you can see by the 8th cut, we're at about 1.5 hours. So we actually screened this 1.5 hour cut at the self-hired office. We brought in some tree planters, some friends, people who knew about tree planting and people who didn't. And we just like tested it on them and got their opinions on it. The final film is 44 minutes, so this was about double the length. So big thanks to those people who sat through that screening. And the purpose of this is to get an idea of how your film will be perceived in a room of different people. I think when we watch something on our own, when we watch it on a small screen, it's really hard to kind of get that perspective. And you'll notice right away when you watch something in a room with someone else. Like for instance, if you're watching a horror movie and your mom's in the room, you're gonna kind of see it through her eyes a little bit. If something's like inappropriate, you're gonna wonder how she perceives it. When things are cutting quickly, you're gonna wonder the way that they're keeping up. You know, everybody brings their own subjective experience to the table as an audience member, and I think it's really hard as an editor to get the perspective of what all these opinions equal out to, because your perspective, my perspective on this as a tree planter is extremely biased. I'm very emotionally involved. I've had a lot of prior experience with this stuff. There's just so many questions that I probably wouldn't think of to ask, and thankfully at this test screening people had a chance to ask those questions, and I got a feel for what is the story missing, what do we still need to explain, where do we need to take this. You'll notice with projects of this size with Adobe, when you're working on it on a long period of time, kind of the further the time goes and the more individual files you have in your file, you start to get a really clunky behaving project file no matter what you do. You know, I take a lot of care to clean out my media cache and try to delete unused files. But when you're dealing with a project file that has 20,000 pieces of footage in it, which I started this project file well over a year ago now, it's bound to behave kind of badly, and that's what I'm kind of dealing with right now. It's a little bit slow, and that's bound to happen. That's why when I finish this file, when I have my pick lock here, I export that into a color correction file, an MOV, an MXF, DNxHD, something like that. And once I get my color corrected file, and once I get my sound mixed and mastered files, I start a whole new project file, so that when I'm doing all my final outputs, I don't have to continue loading this clunky project file over and over. Very time consuming. So here's an interesting thing where for this project, I put out some call to actions on social media, basically looking for the right kind of footage, because the restrictions of the grant that we did, we got the money to do this film late August, early September, and the final product had to be done by June 1st. But if you know tree planting, you know that the main season is from May to the end of July. So in order to have enough time for post-production, it really kind of ruled out filming during the main planting season. So that was a huge hurdle that we had to cross right off the beginning. We had to figure that out before we even kind of accepted this grant and decided that this was something we could do. The way that we did that was by sourcing footage from planters across Canada, actually. You see all these people here. I'll mention a couple names. Allison Henry offered us the photos. You know, I forget everyone's full names here. These are the people who helped us out, though. Calvin Van Aragon, he's an awesome cinematographer from Ontario. We had a couple people just send us some cell phone clips, little drone clips. I think that's Erin Bross sending some personal videos that she had. I had some of my own footage. This was how I got the grant, was that I had been filming for 2 seasons. I had filmed in Alberta and BC from my planting season. This is George Momchilov. He sent us a lot of awesome drone footage. We got a lot of compliments on the drone footage. That's thanks to George and Scooter here, Jonathan Scooter Clark, who sent us by far the most significant contribution. He sent me a hard drive with about 1 terabyte worth of footage on it. And you can see I went through about 6 cuts here, just cutting down Scooter's footage. I'll give you an example. This is what Scooter's footage looked like when I put it all in a timeline. So it's about 20 hours worth of footage. I think I had to split it up into 2 timelines because I think it was actually over 24 hours, if I remember right. And through an extreme refining process, I cut that down to the very best half hour with a lot of gaps. So this is really probably about the best 25 minutes. And this is just so time consuming. This is what makes documentaries difficult, is going through every single one of those clips, watching it twice, watching it first time, and then watching it again, cutting it down. So after I had my rough assembly and we had our test screening, I learned that we needed to still do a lot of work. So actually what we did at that point was I just threw out all the work that I had done. I made some mental notes of some things that I've, little gems that we found, things that fit nice together. But for the most part, that was just a way of testing it out and having like a practice cut basically. So then much further on, maybe 6 months later, I started what would be the final assembly. And I did this before the last day of filming, but after the majority of the filming had been done. So this is what my first assembly cut looked like. And this is a lot closer to around that 44-minute range. But then by the 7th assembly, I really had like almost everything in one timeline. So my timeline's more like an hour 15. And this is all about organizing. This isn't getting a fine edit at all. This is just trying to fit all this stuff into one timeline if I could. This is everything I had, and this is the stuff that I couldn't fit. You can see my project file still has some problems with it. This is the stuff I couldn't fit, and I was trying to find a way to get it into that cut. And then you see of my cuts, like what I considered doing a cut of OMT were, I guess, finer changes. There was only 5 final cuts. So my first cut looked very similar to that assembly. I've gotten a little closer, but then by my 5th cut, all that extra footage is gone. This is all that's left of that like 45 minutes at the end here. This is all the stuff that I thought was good enough to go in, but I didn't have a place for yet. And then I got my pick lock. And I don't exactly remember why I made a second pick lock, but to be honest, when things get to this stage, it can get pretty messy. So I just wanted to kind of show you an idea of what goes into the edit of a documentary, what it really looks like on my project file, because my sequences, as you can see, like each of these sequences, some of these sequences are multiple days of work. Each of them is like around a day of work, you know. This is just never ending. Every day that we filmed, I would spend a day editing, and then once we finally wrapped on filming, I probably did about 2 months straight, where this was my only job for about 2 months, was trying to get this into a film, and the scrolling just goes on and on. And maybe you saw right here the 1 billion cut. So this was basically our marketing campaign, was 1 billion trees. And this is all the stuff that we left over, all the interview clips, songs, and B-roll that we left over. And I wanted to try to find a place for it. As you can see, it was over around 2 hours, maybe a little under 2 hours with this gap here of like good stuff that could have gone in a film. And then by cut 12, I've got that cut down to, well, there's still quite a bit here that haven't shared. Maybe waiting until there's another marketing campaign. I feel like we kind of saturated social media. We put out so much tree planting videos. That's a little rundown on how I edited the 1 million trees. This documentary was truly my dream job. Getting to do something that's distributed by CBC, having complete creative control over a product that we own at the end of the day. We own all the rights to this film. Was probably the best experience of my life so far, and I hope to do something again like this soon.